Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind. And today I have the awesome opportunity to speak with Michael Griffiths. Michael is a principal in Deloitte's workforce transformation practice. His career spanned everything from mergers and acquisitions, leadership development, and workforce transformations for some of the leading firms worldwide. And for those of you that don't know, Deloitte provides audit and assurance, tax, consulting, risk, financial advisory, maybe even a bit of AI services to some of the largest corporations and governmental agencies. Thanks for coming on the show, Michael.
So happy to be here.
Well, Mike, the first thing I wanted to kind of get your opinions on, you have a way of looking at the workforce, the future of work, jobs for skills. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about how how you work and what do you do over at Deloitte?
Happy to answer. Yeah, I'm really privileged to say that I love my work and I love what we're doing in this space. And I love how how we can help our organizations really meet their workforce needs and then strive towards business impact. So it's really as simple as that. The workforce strategies we do for our clients are focused on helping them understand their workforce, bring equity into that conversation, and deliver essentially a personalized experience as much as possible for their workforce. Ultimately drives revenue. We're finding that more and more organizations are putting skills rather than jobs at the center of that conversation, of that talent process, really to understand their workforce in a deeper way and then use them better. And it's just such a fascinating time to be helping our organizations.
So I was reading some of your work and watching some of your videos, and you talk about skills. And I see that a lot with LinkedIn and other sites too. It seems a big thread. For people who are watching this, listening to it, what does that really mean for skills? And particularly if, let's say, you're looking for a job, should you be looking for skills that you have or the job title? Is that what you mean? Or when you're working at the company, should you focus on your skills rather than the job description?
Yeah, it's such an interesting time. I mean, just to give you a sense of where the marketplace is, and as you point, we've done a lot of research in this space. Really, the ultimate aspect is the jobs aren't really working as a construct for organizations. Our research says that 19% of business execs and 23% of workers say that they think work is better sort of structured around their skills than necessarily their jobs. 2 out of 3 workers say they'd much rather be attracted to an organization that organizes around skills and to work than jobs. And 8 out of 10 workers say they'd much rather be evaluated on their skills and succession and their deployment based upon skills rather than necessarily the job. It creates more equity and fairness. So the sort of argument is over around whether jobs are sort of valuing people and able to move people within the organization and frankly attract the right people. So we see the massive movement in organizations, but it's not easy. To move from jobs to skills really means you have to sort of understand the skills of your people in a deeper way. And you also have to break down the work into tasks that you can start matching people in a more agile way from skills into those tasks, into roles, projects, assignments, etc. But to your point around, if you're looking for a job and you want to sort of think, is this organization on that journey? You really just need to look at the job description. Does it articulate tasks in a deeper way rather than just sort of big buckets? Does it talk about the skills in a very sort of tangible way for that particular role based upon those tasks? And so sort of, can you sort of infer from it that you can match those skills to potentially for what you have and where you potentially can go? And also sometimes it talks around the potential in the resume, in the request. So sort of leading towards you just getting in the door and learning and developing and then being able to grow. Look for potential in some of the job descriptions too. I think it's an important word.
Could it also be this way? So a lot of the people who watch this podcast are software engineers, software developers, folks like that. And I think, Rick, you would know the most recent numbers, but it's something like 150,000 plus techies were let go within this year alone. So then if you're going by skills, so let's say you worked at Meta and now, you're worried about losing your job, you lost it. should you say, hey, I'm a software developer, at a social media platform, but maybe to open up the parameters to find a new job, don't think in those terms, but think about what skills do I have? And maybe I could go into healthcare, maybe I can go somewhere else. Or is that kind of the thought process that people should start thinking and looking through that lens?
Well, it's not just for individuals, it's definitely for organizations too. And I'll give you an example of this in our 2023 Human Capital Trends report, we write about this around the idea of the topic of end of jobs and using skills. Through the pandemic, there was a nursing shortage. It was pretty prevalent and global. And one organization that we write about in that trends report was exactly in that situation. So what they did is they broke down the tasks and the skills for their nurses in a very, very detailed way and sort of analyzed their nurses for those skills. Then they surveyed their workforce for those skills, and they found two things. They found some nurses that had recently had certifications that had gone out of date, and they quickly upskilled them back into their certifications to use them, which is natural. The second thing, which is really interesting, on the edge of those skills for a nurse, there were sort of administrative-based tasks that were part of a skill and a job and a task for nurses. And they also found administrators that were sort of bleeding on the edge of nursing tasks. So they essentially shifted the work that way, unlocking huge potential for that for those nurses and being able to do high-value work. The reason I use that as an example is you understanding your work and how much of it is repeatable or task-based, and the adjacency for those skills is really important. So I do think for every worker and then every organization, they need to look at not just the core skills that that individual has, but the adjacent skills that they have, because those are the potential for that worker and the workforce and where you can drive more capability. There's another example, MasterCard, which talks about the idea that they are, and they've written about this in the press, they're able to unlock thousands of hours by using a sort of talent marketplace approach, by mapping skills to tasks, and that enables them to use their workforce in a much better way. So this is where we see people going. And yes, to your question, focusing on human skills is a core component for every worker.
I quite like these examples, right? Because previously, I think the common kind of perception is this kind of adjacency is more common in startups where it is born out of necessity, right? There's necessarily fewer resources and fewer people to do the tasks needed. So you naturally need to flex, right? So a recruiter, if the firm is on a hiring freeze, because they are, naturally or typically good at sales or project management, because that is, quite common in recruiting, they might be able to transition into a project manager role or a sales role or something similar. So I quite love that even the largest organizations of thousands, tens of thousands of people worldwide are doing something clearly on a larger scale there.
Absolutely. It's a mandate, honestly, to be able to utilize your workforce appropriately. And the other thing which is really important in this conversation, frankly, is that it also, Rick, to your point, it creates a career progression, right? It gives your workforce a way for them to feel that they can actually adapt within the four walls of your organization and not have to look elsewhere. You're giving them portability and transparency into that portability, which often has been in large organizations less prevalent. So yeah, really, really important for organizations to take this step.
It's really interesting, Rick, that you brought it up, because I wrote not too long ago about Zapier, where they built up back in 2020, 21, when everything was booming. They hired aggressively, had tons of recruiters, and then all of a sudden, bang, you hit into the end of 2022, layoffs, downsize. So instead of laying off the recruiters, which the recruiters are one of the ones that are first to go, HR recruiters and DEI, those are the ones I notice get cut a lot. So they said, hey, it's so hard to find these people, and we're confident that the tide will turn and change. So instead of just letting them go and then maybe 6 months later have to start recruiting and training all over again, let's retrofit them as Rick and you were saying, let's retrofit them and put them into project management, sales, marketing, whatever the case may be, to take their skills and forget about the we're putting on your recruiter hat. Just what do you have sales skills, you have other abilities, and move in there. And so far, it looks like, I guess it's working. I haven't seen a lot of more layoffs announced by the company. So I could take that as a positive sign.
Yeah, I think this is a great conversation, because ultimately, if you everyone, a worker, your audience, in the tech industry or more technically orientated, it's just thinking about yourself as a human first, right? And what as a human, how can I create the skills that make me more human? How can I be more empathetic, understanding, creative, innovative? How can I seek to understand those human skills, and actually developing them, honing them, cultivating them is a really important step for us all to do, because it makes you more adaptable. You can learn quicker. You can use those skills. You can learn technical skills much quicker if you seek to understand, and you have the ability to be more portable across organizations. It's a really important step. And you mentioned in your start, Rick, around AI, or maybe it was Jack, around the idea of AI being more and more important. As we think about AI being utilized more and more in organizations and taking away maybe tasks that are a bit more technical or potentially more repeatable, we're all going to have to use our human skills more and more, because they're going to differentiate us beyond the technical ability of AI. So that's another imperative for us to be moving in that direction.
Now, I'm curious, you mentioned this humanity, which sounds easy, but quite often when you're in the trenches, it's very, again, easy to get into this kind of trap of, well, I derive so much meaning in my job title, right? I'm a senior software engineer. My company, my startup has a fairly defined career ladder. I know what's next, right? It's this next title. And now you're focusing on this like skills and this like people to people interaction. How do you suggest kind of shifting for the professional or the worker, that mindset, and getting into this kind of like new skills based economy?
Yeah, it's absolutely a challenge. I will tell you though, again, I do think that that the sort of the movement from the workforce is kind of there already.
Ah,
People, there's a recent study that happened last year that said that 55% of the workforce is going to move between talent models, if they have, or they are now or about to. So they're moving from on balance sheet to contingent to gig to consulting, etc. So more than half the workforce are consistently moving, and when they move, they're not necessarily thinking about that brand that you talk about. They're more talking about opportunities, and opportunities come in multiple different fashions when you think about moving through those talent models, and it really comes to the actual skills as the portability through it. So and then individuals through our studies absolutely want to be seen based upon their skills and potential, and not on their certification. There's a great initiative out there which you may have read about, called 110. Deloitte's part of this initiative, and multiple organizations are. The idea is to hire 10,000 Black Americans into corporate jobs that do not have graduate degrees. So they don't have that certification. They don't have that badge that a lot of organizations say, okay, now you can enter. And the initiative here is to say, how can we identify, attract, and then place this workforce, which has pretty been ignored, into organizations, and skills are the answer. It makes them more portable, and you can understand and place them. And there's been some great success in organizations utilizing this workforce that's been overlooked, and finding new ways to attract that talent. So I think the movement is there. And I sometimes feel like we think it's a challenge, but most people, especially the more sort of less tenured, should I say, that a part of our workforce, are already there.
It's funny when you mention it like that, right? Because it's quite inherent, right? When you explain it like that, it seems like, oh yeah, of course, like people naturally will see like I have these skills. I want to match it up with these responsibilities. It's not quite as complex or technical as it might seem on a kind of a perhaps a higher intellectual level.
Yeah, and it comes down to you're getting on the nut of it as well, to be honest with you, Rick. It's sort of when someone says, "What do you do?" and you answer, the answer is, "I do multiple things."
Right.
And I enjoy doing this. That's how people are answering more and more. They're not saying job title.
Right.
That's literally what they're saying, and that could be what they're doing of volunteering, how they're adding to community, what they're doing in their work, sports, recreation, community as a whole. We're finding more and more people answer that way than necessarily I am a software engineer, right? So I think there's a huge movement in that space, and I'm a huge fan of it. We're actually then helping people become individuals rather than a brand or a collective.
I mean, I think it's really interesting because one thing that I had to learn personally through my kind of career arc is this kind of transition between treating something as a job versus a career, right? And now it seems like this is kind of further eroding this idea of the job, right? Is that too aggressive to say, or what's your take on that?
I absolutely do think the idea of a defined job is moving past it. Now, I will say I'm going to caution this a little bit because there is an element of jobs and the idea of construct of jobs that organizations are continually having to use to make things, to build talent processes. When you think about sort of job architecture, spans and layers, rewards, comp, etc. There's an element for jobs in those and linking skills to it. But there are organizations that have completely moved away from it. We write again in our human capital trends report, there's one manufacturing organization that has two levels. They have CEO and everyone else.
Okay.
And what they do at the start of the year is they ask first at the organization level, what are our objectives for the year? And then they break it down into different business units, those objectives, again, from the top down. Then they write those objectives by teams, and eventually they come into individuals. And those individuals review those objectives over the end of the year. And essentially, at the end of the year, those outcomes that they've approved, they've said they're going to achieve, did they achieve them? That's how they get compensated. So it takes a little bit more effort than sort of saying job review, etc. But frankly, it's the same as what we do anyway, but it's taking away that idea of jobs forming. And obviously, if you can think culturally for an organization, it makes it much more innovative and flat when you start to drive those experiences. So organizations are doing it. It is moving that way.
Michael, you can appreciate this. I run a search firm, executive search firm, place people predominantly on Wall Street. And the titles, people, they define themselves by it. And sometimes it's so hard to place somebody if, let's say, they're a director or a managing director, and that's how they view themselves. Now, they can go to another company with a lesser title, but more money, and they would still feel awkward to make that move. So for a lot of people, it's so embedded in their psyche, for their peers, for their family, when they go, you live out in Long Island now, right? If you're in like one of these nice communities in Long Island and they ask first thing you're at a dinner party, what do? They want to brag. I'm a managing director at Goldman Sachs. I'm a partner at Goldman Sachs. I'm at this, as opposed to telling, hey, I'm on a trading floor. That doesn't sound sexy, but so I would like to see what you're doing happen because it would make it easier for me selfishly as a recruiter, because then it takes away, because if you strip away the title, then, okay, you could really talk what makes the most sense for your career. What's valuable? Is it the title? And are you just taking it because you want to brag, or take your skills and you're going to do something really wonderful and have an even better job and put your ego aside? And that's something, dude, I've seen this for the last 20 years about that. And it's so hard for people to get past it. But a lot do. And maybe it takes time. And maybe we're in a zone now where people are going to start reevaluating, like we've done it with a lot of things after the pandemic, just reevaluating our work, our work lives, and, what do we really want to do with that, our future?
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a transformation. You know, this is the comment you just made. You know, there's always a moment in time where things become, you know, less sort of startup tech, sort of on the edges to more fundamental aspect. And we write again in our trends report around setting new fundamentals in this world, because to be successful, to be ahead, to be the next, you don't want to be now, you want to be the future, right? And you and those fundamentals really are essentially around experimenting, around trying, experimenting, learning, doing again. And I think we're seeing a lot of organizations dip their toe in, see how their workforce react, and then get back to it, and then iterate and make it contextual for them. And I think that's really, really important. You know, if we think about personally, one of the conversations we're having a lot right now is around sort of the idea of hybrid. Is the debate over hybrid over, for example? And from our research, it 100% is. You know, 3/4 of women say that they prefer hybrid work, and even more than that, a higher percentage of Gen Z and millennials are demanding hybrid work. So I think it's kind of over, but some organizations are still struggling with, I need to mandate rather than create choice. And really that's it. We're at the point where hybrid means choice, and you have to offer choice. It's the conversation's over. I think that's a good example of where something that was on the edges has now become a fundamental for organizations. And the quicker they get there, the better they will be to hold on to top talent.
Yeah, no, I'm curious, and I want to kind of pull at the string a little bit. You mentioned that the debate over hybrid work is over. Um, who has decided this? Is it in terms of specific industries where you've seen that this adoption in terms of this kind of recognition is much faster, or are the kind of their CEO executive councils or something similar where they've decided, oh, like workers actually just need the autonomy, right? And we're going to let them choose their own work schedule, or location even.
Yeah, I mean, there's two key components to this. First of all, we've all seen it in the rise of worker agency and the voice of the workforce being so much more categorized to or aligned to, frankly, where the organization needs to go. Organizations that listen to their workforce actually drive more innovation and creativity and co-create with their workforce a lot more. That creates differentiated value. Again, we write in a trends report around this and show some examples around how organizations do and should co-create. And then secondly is around data. We know much more about our workforce preferences, choice, ideas, concepts. The rise in worker data is massive. An HBR article last year that talks around 90% of workers are willing to share their human capital data in a reasonable detail if organizations are able to show how they're benefiting from it. So massive shift in terms of people willing to share data and organizations being able to use it. So those two things, we know more about our workforce, or we should, and we have to let them into the conversation and co-create with us, are driving this. But to your point of how do we know, it's not just in our research. The two stats I just talked around worker, Gen Z and millennial, and women saying, you know, sort of 3/4 of them saying they want hybrid work. But if you step on any research out there, it's absolutely a mandate. And we also have some research to say, if you don't provide it, I'm going to leave. And it has to be choice. And this is really important. Hybrid doesn't mean it's just return to work or remote work. That's really a red herring in terms of the conversation. Sure, that's a component of it. How much is in office? How much is remote? But there's also the elements of co-locating. How do you co-locate virtually, potentially through new technologies? The ideas of AI and enabled and unlimited reality and meeting in that space is becoming more and more a concept for organizations to utilize and invest in. So there's multiple levels, but what we say is design from the work, understand how work needs to be done, and then design the actual experience, the hybrid model based upon that work. Some things have to be together in an office, but a lot of things actually are more effectively done in a different way. So it actually drives productivity if you do it right.
I see your point, right? Because we see this commentary on Blind quite a bit, where there's often this debate, right? And it's often at the extremes, like I want to only work remotely, or I think we should return to the office. I think all these CEOs, especially in the tech industry, that are saying workers are less productive, I think they're right. And when you actually boil down and look through the commentary, it's actually about, oh no, I think depending on your role and your skills and what you need to accomplish, sometimes it makes sense to be in the office, or I need to be able to choose what works best for me because of my lifestyle or my personal situations, right? And
Yes.
I think you're exactly right. That nuance is lost when kind of the mass media or kind of the executives are thinking in kind of almost simplistic terms, even.
Binary, right? And
Right.
and that's it's created a binary reaction. And that's just not good. We need to drive strategies from work, and we need to create choice. It's as simple as that. In construct, in execution, of course that's complicated, but you just got to put the effort in, for sure.
Right. I find that that's often the case in quite a lot of the work, right, that we all do. That there's always this sense of like nuance, right? I think Netflix was quite popular a few years ago when they had their infamous culture deck, right? That said, well, I think everyone knows what they should be able to spend their money on, the company's money on, right? Like we don't need a corporate expense report where it says from this value, it needs to be approved by this person, right? You naturally know, is it necessary for your role? Go and do it, right? And at that time, it was seen as quite revolutionary, right? And now perhaps in 2023, we're looking back and saying, well, yeah, that makes sense, right? Like treat people like adults and they will act like adults, right?
Yeah, completely agree. Meet them where they are, for sure,
Right.
and believe in the human element of people and trust them. I mean, there was a debate a while ago whether organizations saying, do people intrinsically want to learn and develop? I think again that debate is over. Should we invest a certain amount? Yes, we believe intrinsically people want to develop themselves, and if we give them the path, they will actually walk down it. So it's an evolution, not a revolution, for sure, in a lot of these conversations, which is, it should be comforting for organizations and business leaders. This is an experimentation, and contextualize it for your organization, make it right for you, but definitely experiment and try.
Michael, just to get back, and Rick, to AI for a minute. I just read that Goldman Sachs put out this big report saying 300 million, and the number seems crazy, 300 million people are going to be impacted by artificial intelligence. At Deloitte, are you guys working on anything, or what's your take on, is that number just like trying to clickbait almost to get your attention? Is it real? Do people have to worry? Who has to worry? Do you have any, I don't mean to jump because this is so new and evolving, so I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Not at all.
We're all
not
trying
at
to
all.
figure it out as we go along.
We absolutely are, for sure. And it is, as a parent, I had a conversation with my son, 16-year-old son, the other day, saying, well, do I really need to write homework anymore? Can I just use AI? And it was a fascinating conversation with him. Yeah, but he was reasoning his argument. It was very well balanced. I completely understood where he's coming from. So, and to be honest, there's a little bit, and I know that's comical, but there's a little bit in that, right? So in when we think about organizations, of course, there's an execution element here that can be enabled to move faster and create value in a way that we never thought was possible. But there's a risk in terms of the organization not learning in that experience. There's a risk of over-engineering, over-rotating, and not having the organization differentiate. So I think that's exactly the strategy you have to do and think about. This is, where is it appropriate and where it's not. This is when we had this conversation, I want to say 7 years ago, around automation and the idea of automation coming into the workforce. And does this mean the end of certain jobs, right? Are we going to lose the workforce? And we at Deloitte were very specific about that, saying, no, absolutely not. It just means that you're going to create super jobs and then super teams, essentially elevating the human element and customer experience of the individual. In a simple way, we talked about the idea that, back when a teller in a bank used to basically transact. They used to literally, you come in and you want money, they would transact. And then the ATM came along and they don't have to do that anymore. Now, for a time, you needed tellers at that point to be customer service. Now we've gone more remote, and therefore that has happened less and less. However, the automation didn't actually take away the job. It actually enhanced it. It made them be more customer service. They had to sell, they had to change their behaviors and create capabilities. What changed the job actually was customers' behavior. So I think we have to look at what is the ultimate behavior and ultimate goal of what the organization is trying to do, and how's their customer behaving, and not just say, let's use technology because we have it. And I think it's a really important strategy for organizations as they think about enabling it. But it's fascinating. I mean, the idea of sort of unlimited reality as well, around utilizing that to connect people and to create value. Organizations that are selling products in unlimited reality before they release it in the real world. A fascinating conversation. So I think it's a wonderful time for all of us to learn about these things, but again, contextualize it and make sure you don't go too far and lose the secret sauce of your organization: differentiation, learning.
Rick, are you seeing on the Blind platform, some of these technologists pivoting to the AI space or doing startups in the AI space?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what Michael was talking about. Oftentimes and I say we as in kind of like just the human condition, think in binaries, right? Because it's simpler, right? We think black and white. And so there's a raging debate on Blind between all of these technologists. There's a camp that thinks, oh gosh, remember a few months ago when we thought blockchain and Web3 and the metaverse were going to be the next big things, and then those have kind of fizzed out.
Metaverse, but right, falling apart.
Right. And there's now concerns that, is this kind of speed of adoption, is this kind of interest too sudden? Like, should we think things through? Recently we had a bunch of technology executives, including Elon Musk, saying, oh, perhaps let's just wait 6 months before we come on to the next version of AI, right? Like, let's really think these through. And certainly we see that camp on Blind. But then there are others that are a bit more concerned, right? And they're saying, well, if this is the new fad and this is the new thing that I might need to learn in order to keep my skills and keep my job, right? There's that concern of, well, if ChatGPT just can code and any layperson can say, build me this website or build me this app that looks like this and does this. If AI gets to that point, well, what use is there for kind of a more junior software engineer?
It's so interesting you said that, because I was writing a piece about this whole thing, so I'm trying to get my arms around it. And I look back I wrote a while back where Jack Dorsey, when he was the CEO of Twitter, he was saying in a podcast, he was saying that, hey, coding, eventually we're going to have AI coding, so we're really not going to need people, but the people we have are going to watch over the coding. It was pretty prescient that now, like you're just mentioning, this might be coming to fruition, where a lot of these folks who are blind, who are these technologists, who are these programmers, who are these developers, I don't know, maybe they're using AI and then, I hate to say it, maybe they're less of a need for the software developers, but the ones who stay are going to be the ones who are really awesome, who could oversee this.
Yeah,
quality control too, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Right.
I just think it creates
Interesting.
new jobs.
Yes.
I really believe new skills, new capabilities, new aspirations for individuals. All this technology is wonderful, and sure, makes things faster and quicker, and creates huge value there. But it also creates new needs, right? For quality review, for you have to contextualize some of the content as it comes out. It just creates new skill sets. And this is what we've talked about, the idea of a super job and the super team. It sort of elevates everyone, right? Technology underpinning elevates everyone up and creates them to have more value as a human. And I strongly believe that. So I know maybe I'm too much of an optimist, Rick and Jack, but I strongly believe this is all wonderful things for us. Creates huge value, and someone who's sitting in that field should feel energized about the fact they can do more and they can create more value and not necessarily fearful of their jobs.
Yeah, I would say like I'm more in Michael's camp, right? Where there's this beauty in this human condition, and there's still a necessity for human judgment, right? It can't be replaced. And I think people often forget, especially technologists, they forget, oh, like one of the building blocks of this artificial intelligence is it needs to be trained on some corpus of data, right? And that was created by humans. And someone needs to steer the AI in the right direction, right? Literally, they call it training the model, right? Saying, no, yes, this is correct. There's that Silicon Valley HBO series that said, yes, this is a hot dog, this is not a hot dog, right? Like something as simple as that. And you still need these experts that know that difference, right? And those are necessarily human beings with those life experiences, with their personal backgrounds, those differences in lifestyles that need to inform those decisions.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just as an example we've written about recently, I think would be great in this space. And it's slightly different than AI. It's more around nudging capability, but the idea that technology is helping us be better humans. And I love this example. And we've written in the report is that there's an individual who works in a technology organization, and his actual title is human scientist. So he helps that organization use science to help the humans be better, essentially. And so he talked about two things. He uses technology with his people and it educates others. That when he's speaking, when he's presenting, it gives him nudging technology around whether he's being transparent, whether he's engaging, whether he's speaking too long on a subject, whether his audience is actually engaged with him. I thought that was fascinating. And then when he's in a recognition platform, it will give him nudging whether he's being equitable in his language. Is this fair? Is it transparent? Are you using the right language? Again, it's nudging him to be essentially a better human. And I love those examples because I think that we have the ability to lean on technology. It has to be trained, just as you were saying, Rick, but we can lean on it to help us represent ourselves in a better way and elevate us. And I love that, right? That's such a wonderful opportunity.
It makes a lot of sense because it's humans who are feeding into it. So it's not just magic. So they're putting stuff into it based on their own opinions, their thoughts. Maybe they're not right. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe they're kind of racist. Maybe they're sexist. Maybe they're ageist, whatever. So I could see to you guys' point where you're going to have to find people to kind of watch over that to make sure what are you inputting into it and then monitoring it. And then I could even see places like Deloitte offering services to companies to say, okay, how do we make sure we're doing the right thing? How do we upskill people? So maybe you're displaced, but then how can we get you a job based on your skills to work with this new world that we're entering?
Yeah, we've seen a bit, it's a great to your point, Joe. We've seen a bit of an uptick around organizations outskilling, which I think is a wonderful altruistic aspect where organizations say, if there is a need to take a section of the workforce out based upon business conditions, can we skill them up on their potential so they can get a job somewhere else more equitable? And I love that, right? Isn't that a wonderful thing to do. A lot of that, what they're doing with their upskilling is actually working on human skills, creativity, innovation, learning, etc., so that they can be more transferable. But that's a world I want to live in when organizations do that.
Now, I want to like take a step back and kind of share some context with the audience, right? So we spent the last maybe half an hour or so discussing, and you've been able to kind of vividly paint this picture, right? And systematically break this down into kind of first principles. And I want to like dive into your background and how you've gotten into this field, right? Because I understand workforce transformation is perhaps more of a recent phenomenon or a recent practice. Can you kind of walk us through how you became the principal of this practice?
Thank you for asking. Honored to answer. Yeah, I definitely have a non-traditional, well, maybe there isn't a traditional approach. I don't know anymore, but I was a teacher straight out of college. It's actually kind of a rite of passage in my family. Both my parents were teachers. My brother is a teacher. But the hardest job you can ever do, I created resilience in myself, inner city London, in an underprivileged part of the London to teach in. As a 20-year-old, honestly, I didn't have the skills to be successful at that time. The maturity or the ability to handle change. There, it was, for context, it was an area of London just after the Bosnia-Yugoslavia war, and a lot of the refugees came to that part of London, and there was a policy at the time in England, education system for no child left behind. So all students went into mainstream education rather than into specialized schools. And so essentially that meant that I had, kids who just came out of war, and I was a 20-year-old trying to educate them. I just didn't have the skill sets to do it. So I did my best. I learned so much, but I realized I had to move on. Hats off to all teachers out there. I don't think you are rewarded or respected as much as you should be. I 100% believe that. So then I moved into sort of corporate education, startups, etc. Ended up working at QVC, the shopping channel, in the talent function there. Loved it. Wonderful organization. And that was in the UK, and then moved to the US and worked for Accenture. Essentially, what QVC taught me, and this is relative to a lot of questions, is that I loved essentially consulting in the talent space. I loved helping different business units. They had like broadcasting, they had engineering, they had buying, sales, and obviously corporate function, finance, HR, etc. But I was sort of a consultant for all of them, and I loved it. And I loved working with that organization to be creative. So that taught me that consulting is what I wanted to do. Came over, worked for Accenture for many years, and now at Deloitte. Always kind of in the talent space, helping, learning, etc. And what I've loved in both Accenture and Deloitte is the idea that you're honestly helping people. I strongly believe that we're helping our clients do things that they don't necessarily have the time or space or freedom or capability to do at the time. We get them there faster. We can bring our experience, and so they do it right. And the reason the workforce transformation has become more of a topic is everything we just talked about, frankly. Everything around workforce sentiment, workforce desires. Organizations have to understand them, driving from workforce needs, and most importantly, every organization now, their workforce is their most important asset. I'd argue every organization, doesn't matter what you do. And that's become more and more important over the years. So that's why it's prevalent now. And and it's been a great journey. And thanks for asking the question.
I mean, I'm going to tease you a bit, but are there a bit of a difference between teaching school children and advising these companies, these executives?
More similarity than you would think, Rick.
Wow.
I think, ultimately the skill set I need is, humility, is seeking to understand and ability to put myself in their shoes and help them on a change journey, etc. That if I had the skills now that I had back then, I would have used that much more than teaching, and I think I would have been more successful, frankly, as a teacher, because you don't move anyone unless you actually They feel like you're in their, on their camp, in their camp. So that skills is absolutely the same. I think the other belief system that's very important is that you believe that everyone wants to do their best, and whatever's getting in their way, it could be organization structure, it could be political within organization. There's an intrinsic belief that everyone wants the best out of themselves and for their people. And again, I think that's a comparative. The best teachers in the world, we all know, have that 100%, right? They believe in you, and they believe in the positivity of humans. So I try to bring that element too. I think I add a lot to the world. My brother's still a teacher. He does way more important work than I do. I swear it. It's just the way he continues to add value to the world is a wonderful thing. So thank you, Richard, for doing what you're doing. It's wonderful.
Now, I'm curious, how did you make that transition? Was it as simple as, getting a recruiter like Jack to reach out to you and make that jump into kind of the field of management consulting? Or did you have to actively kind of take steps to translate those skills, or convince others that your skills could work at their organization or in their industry?
Yeah, it's a mixture of working hard and getting lucky, really. I mean, that's absolutely true. I would tell you that if I was sitting out there right now and say you're a teacher and you're thinking to move into consulting, our practice at Deloitte has hired multiple people in the teaching profession. Teach for America, experience, etc. I'm a strong believer that gives you such good core resilience and skill sets that are transferable into consulting. I think it's huge. The other thing I would say is you've got to learn about the business, the industry. How do we make money? How does that work with, how do we interact with clients? How does the business structured? You've got to take the time to understand the context. Hugely important. So when you step in that conversation, you come across as someone already there rather than someone who's outside. I think it can't be underplayed. And then, lead with yourself. Lead your intrinsic self. Don't try to be someone else. I've always tried to do that, and I think that comes across. And I definitely want to interview people that comes across too. You've got to be. You really got to be. People have to believe in you, in your story, and I think that's really important too.
I imagine for some people it can be quite daunting to have to collect that information, right? Where I imagine consultants, you in any given day, you could work with various industries, and they could be disparate companies, and it's quite challenging to kind of stay educated. Do you have any advice for folks, even at outside of the management consulting industry, to learn more about the business that they operate in, learn about the market, and that like?
Well, definitely listen to the Blind podcast, right? That's step one. That's step one, right? For sure. Consistently do that. Now, I mean, there's so many different ways to find information and educate yourself. That's the benefit of, we talked about technology earlier. I'm a strong believer in podcasts. I really am. You can learn on the go. You can listen where you can drive it, and that information can feed to you. Set up the structures for yourself for learning, subscriptions, ideas, push mentality. Take the time, not necessarily to like review on a one-time exercise, but actually create like a structure for yourself where you get information fed to you on a systematic way. That's very important because it's so easy these days, right? You can get feeds that match your needs in a very consistent way, but then you've got to take the time. I mean, you really have to take the time. I say this all the time to my teams. You've got to take the time to understand the industry and talk to folks, and however best you learn, take the time to learn, whether it's reading, listening, talking, whatever it is. Find the best way to learn, and then take the time to understand. And the most important thing I always say is understand how that company makes money. If you can understand that, you pretty much got everything else.
Really? That's simple.
Yeah, it really is. But you say that, but you've got multinational organizations that have sales and trading, they have marketing, they have, they sell and deliver products, they grow food. I mean, all in one business. So
Right.
that answer can be like peeling of an onion, but as far as you can get into the onion is important. But if you can understand how they make money, we talked about financial services. What is a derivative? That could take you down a rabbit hole for like 10 months. But seriously, you have to understand these concepts. And if you always say, I'm trying to figure out how they make money, you'll understand a lot of how the organization is constructed.
It almost sounds trite, but it seems like follow the money and just get started, right? I think it's very easy to kind of like lose that humanity, right? And just get caught up in almost like this like intellectual kind of circle, but actually getting in the trenches and starting to like unravel, peel that first layer of the onion, could really unlock quite a bit of human potential.
Absolutely.
Now, Michael, I really appreciate this masterclass that you've shared with us in terms of just what the workforce is actually like, what the top companies are thinking about this, and your own experience in terms of how to break this all down and make sense of it. So thank you for coming on the show.
I loved the conversation, both of you. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Rick.
Thank
It
you
was
so
wonderful.
much.